The wind howled down from the ridge, carrying the scent of smoke and something far more dangerous: memories. Eliza froze on the porch, heart hammering, as three shadows emerged from the tree line. Her past had found her. Not in a courtroom, not in her sleep, but here, on the land she was learning to call home. And leading them was the ghost she feared most, Victor Slade. The barn was already burning when she saw him. Victor Slade, the man who once caged her like an animal. Now he was back, dragging a child toward the fire, and Eliza, once too afraid to speak, stepped forward. "Let her go," she said, voice steady, eyes blazing. Behind her, Callum raised the rifle. This time, she wasn't running. Dry Hollow, Montana Territory. Summer, 1887. The sun loomed high, punishing and unrelenting, casting long shadows across the dust-choked streets of Dry Hollow. It was the kind of heat that made wooden porches hiss beneath boot heels and dried the skin to parchment. The town moved slowly, not because it was lazy, but because everything decent had long since withered under the weight of judgment, gossip, and hard years. And in the middle of it all stood the cage, not tucked behind the sheriff's office or hidden in an alley, but right in the center of the square, like a shameful centerpiece no one wanted to talk about, but everyone wanted to see. Rusted iron bars, one broken hinge, a crude wooden sign hung on the side, scrawled in dark paint like a verdict. No kin, no money, unclaimed. Inside, hunched and silent, sat a woman. Her name, though no one there cared to ask, was Eliza Bray. Her dress had once been blue, but now it hung in ash-colored rags. Her bare feet were cut and caked in dirt. Her wrists were rubbed raw from shackles that hadn't even been tightened properly, just carelessly fastened by a sheriff who had more cruelty than courage. She didn't beg. She didn't cry. She just existed, a forgotten thing. The townsfolk didn't stop. They passed her like they would a broken fence post or a dead dog on the road. Eyes sliding away, or worse, lingering with morbid interest. One man spat at her feet and laughed. Another woman muttered, "Trash ought to be cleared." But none of them unlocked the cage. No one questioned why a woman without charges or trial had been imprisoned. In Dry Hollow, being alone was crime enough. Then came the wagon. It creaked slowly into view from the north road, pulled by two tired horses. A man sat at the reins, broad-shouldered, weather-worn, with a face carved by sun and silence. In the back of the wagon sat 5 girls, their ages ranging from barely walking to almost grown, all watching the town with cautious eyes. The wagon rolled to a stop. The man dismounted without a word. Callum Reed. He didn't wear a badge or a gun on his hip, but the way he moved made people step aside. Quiet strength radiated from him, not the kind that demanded attention, but the kind that earned respect. He didn't go to the general store. He didn't speak to the sheriff. His eyes went straight to the cage, and to Eliza. Their eyes met, hers hollow, unreadable, his steady, searching. She didn't move. She barely breathed, but something flickered in that look, something ancient and aching. Recognition, perhaps, not of face, but of pain. A voice called from a nearby stoop, "You're new here, stranger." The man chewing tobacco, Wade Harlan, grinned without warmth. "That's just a vagrant. Sheriff locked her up for sleeping behind the livery. Nothing but trouble." Callum didn't respond. Instead, he walked to the cage, knelt slowly so his eyes met hers again. Gently, he reached into his satchel and pulled out a folded wool blanket. He didn't toss it. He threaded it between the bars, careful and deliberate. "Here," he said quietly, "you shouldn't be cold and alone." Eliza stared. For a heartbeat, she didn't move. Then slowly, she reached out and gripped the fabric with both hands, as if it might vanish. She wrapped it around her shoulders, not just for warmth, but for the memory of being seen. Callum stood. Without ceremony, he pulled a hammer from his belt. Wade shouted something about destruction of property, but Callum had already swung once. The lock shattered. A second swing snapped the rusted hasp. The door creaked open. Gasps rose from the storefronts. A broom fell from someone's hand. A paper boy dropped his stack. Callum stepped inside, bent down, and looked into Eliza's face. "Can you walk?" he asked. She opened her mouth. No sound came. Her head shook, barely. "Then I'll carry you." And he did. Not like a hero, not like a man claiming something broken, but like a human being doing what no one else would, lifting another out of the dust and giving her back her name, even if she didn't know it yet. He didn't ask where she came from. He didn't need to, because in that moment, her story became part of his. Night fell slowly across the Montana hills, bleeding gold into indigo as the stars began to blink through the last haze of sunset. The fire was small, nothing more than a ring of rocks with flickering flame, but it pushed back the shadows just enough for the family to sit close. The wagon was parked near a shallow creek, its waters whispering along the stones like secrets in the dark. The chirping of crickets filled the space between breaths. Above, pine trees stood watch, tall and silent. Eliza Bray sat alone, slightly apart from the others, her back resting against a fallen log, arms wrapped around her knees beneath the wool blanket Callum had given her. She hadn't spoken since they left Dry Hollow. Her lips were still cracked, her eyes still wary. She didn't eat, though food had been offered. She didn't move, except to adjust the blanket tighter around her shoulders as the night cooled. Her entire body looked like it was braced for something, for a shout, for a blow, for the next bad thing. She was present, but not yet there. Callum Reed didn't press. He didn't ask her anything. He simply tended to the fire with practiced hands, breaking dry twigs into kindling, adjusting the flame like someone who understood how small things, handled gently, could become strong. His 5 daughters, one by one, approached Eliza in their own quiet ways. June, the eldest at around 12, walked over with a tin cup of cool creek water. She knelt beside Eliza without a word, set it down, and gave her a small nod before retreating to the fire. A few minutes later, Lila, quick-eyed and thoughtful, appeared with a piece of dried apple. She didn't speak either, just placed it carefully near Eliza's folded hands and walked away. Then came Pearl, barely more than 4, her hair in messy braids and her nightdress a bit too big. She stumbled over with a sleepy wobble and, without hesitation, climbed into Eliza's lap, curling into a tight ball. Eliza stiffened. Her arms froze in place. She hadn't held anything soft or living in years. And yet, this little girl, this innocent thing, had nestled against her like she'd always belonged there. She exhaled slowly, unsure, and let her arms fall around the child. It was the first human contact she'd allowed in months. Across the fire, Callum watched, but not in a way that intruded. His expression was unreadable, but something in his gaze was steady, grounding. Minutes passed. The flames popped. The stars grew brighter. And then, very softly, Eliza's voice broke the silence. It was hoarse, barely above a whisper, like her vocal cords had forgotten how to work. "Why did you save me?" Callum looked up. He didn't answer immediately. He tossed a twig into the fire, watching the spark leap upward before speaking. "Because no one deserves to be in a cage." 6 simple words, no drama, no heroism, just truth. Eliza stared at him, waiting for something more, some hint of motive, some hidden expectation. But there was nothing, just his calm voice, the fire's gentle crackle, and Pearl's slow breathing against her chest. She wanted to argue, to say he was wrong, that she did deserve it, that she'd made mistakes, trusted the wrong people, taken too much, asked too little. But the words didn't come. Her throat clenched. Her mind flooded with reasons, but none of them mattered right now. Because something about the way he said it, quiet and unshaken, carried weight, a weight strong enough to chip away at her carefully built walls. She looked down at Pearl, whose small fingers had unconsciously curled into her dress. Eliza had never had children of her own, never had the chance. But something about this moment, the softness, the trust given without cause, filled a part of her she didn't know was still empty. Across the camp, the girls settled into sleep, huddled in quilts inside the wagon. Callum remained by the fire, feeding it just enough to keep it alive. Eliza didn't move. She didn't sleep either, but the tension in her shoulders softened. The sting behind her eyes eased. She glanced at Callum again. "You don't even know me," she said. He didn't look away from the fire. "I don't need to," he replied. And there it was again, that maddening, patient kindness, that felt more dangerous than cruelty. She didn't know what to do with it. The night deepened. The creek murmured on. The fire burned low. Somewhere in the trees, an owl hooted once, then went quiet. Eliza looked up at the sky. She hadn't seen it without bars in front of it for weeks, maybe longer. And though her body ached and her soul still carried 1,000 bruises, for the first time since she'd been locked away, she began to believe that maybe, not today, but someday, she might be more than just something left behind. By dawn, the wagon crested a rise just as the morning sun spilled over the hills, bathing the land below in a warm golden haze. Willow Bend Ranch came into view, its weathered roof sloped with years, its porch sagging gently at the corners, and smoke curling lazily from the chimney. The swing on the front porch hung crooked on one side, creaking softly in the breeze, like a lullaby from a forgotten memory. Eliza sat between June and Beth, the second and fourth daughters, her fingers tucked under the wool blanket. She'd slept little. Every twig snap in the woods jolted her awake, but she hadn't fled. She hadn't run. As the wagon rolled into the yard, the 5 girls leaned forward with quiet anticipation. Callum stepped down first, the gravel crunching beneath his boots. He turned to look at Eliza, who hesitated. Inside her, war raged. She wanted to believe this was safe ground, but every step closer felt like trespassing. "Is she going to stay with us?" whispered Cleric, the 4th girl, her voice barely audible. Callum glanced at Eliza. "If she wants to," he replied gently. The words startled her more than any order could have. If, not you should, not you will, just if. She stepped down from the wagon slowly, legs stiff from exhaustion, and half expected someone to stop her. No one did. Inside, the house was small but alive with signs of careful living. Sunlight spilled through the windows, glinting off shelves lined with jars, folded quilts, and books that had clearly been read many times. The scent of herbs hung in the air, sage, lavender, perhaps a touch of mint. Not wealth, but warmth. Eliza hovered in the doorway, uncertain whether to sit or stand, to speak or remain invisible. Then Ruth, the middle daughter, freckled, no older than 8, walked over with a torn sleeve in hand. "I ripped it on the fence," she said, holding out the fabric. "Can you fix it?" Eliza blinked. She hadn't been asked for anything in a long time. Orders, yes. Accusations, often. But not something that implied trust. Her hands moved before her thoughts caught up. She took the sleeve, sat down on a bench by the window, and began stitching. Threading the needle felt natural, almost like breathing. The rhythm of sewing returned with muscle memory, one she hadn't used since her mother taught her at a kitchen table in a life long ago. The needle danced between fingers. The girls watched, curious but silent. "You do that fast," June noted. Eliza allowed a small, fleeting smile. "My mama taught me when I was little." After lunch, Callum worked on the gate outside while Eliza stayed indoors with the girls. Anna, the youngest, refused to nap until someone hummed a song. Eliza hesitated, but when she finally began, soft, unsure, wavering, the child's eyes closed. Eliza sat still long after, not wanting to wake the girl. She studied the child's face. So peaceful, so unaware of what the world could do to a woman alone. That night, Eliza coughed in her sleep. Dust still clung to her lungs. When she stirred, a warm cup of tea sat beside her bed. No one had mentioned it, but it had been made with care. Little things. Kindnesses that asked for nothing in return. The days passed gently. Eliza helped with the laundry. She taught Beth how to mend a collar, brushed Ruth's hair by the fire. She moved through the home like a shadow, learning to become real again. But peace is fragile. It always is. One afternoon, while sweeping the front room, a knock came at the door. No one was there. Only a letter wrapped in twine left on the step. No return address, no name, just a message. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the parchment. "He's looking for you. Victor Slade hasn't forgotten. There's a price." That was all. The paper fluttered in her grip like a bird about to take flight. Her breath came shallow. Her vision tunneled. She backed into the house, the letter held like it might burn her. She didn't hear the girls calling from the back room, didn't smell the bread baking in the oven, didn't see the way the sunlight slanted peacefully across the floorboards. Because it was gone now. Peace had a crack, and through it, danger had begun to seep. Callum found her standing near the stove, frozen, the letter still in hand. "What is it?" he asked, voice low. "Calm." Eliza couldn't answer. Her mouth opened, but the words wouldn't form. Callum stepped closer and gently took the letter. He read it. His eyes didn't change. No fear, no surprise. He folded the paper once, then twice, then calmly tossed it into the fire. As it curled to ash, Eliza whispered, barely audible, "He said I belonged to him." Callum didn't flinch, didn't look away. "You don't," he said. "You belong to yourself, or to no one, but never to him." She didn't believe him. Not yet. But as the last of the ash rose and vanished, some small, quiet part of her wanted to. And that, for the first time in years, was enough to keep her from running. Dusk came like a warning. The sun dropped behind the western ridge, casting long fingers of orange and violet across the fields. The shadows thickened in the tree line. Birds quieted. Wind rolled low across the dry grass, carrying the scent of pine and something else. Smoke. Faint but unmistakable. Eliza stood at the kitchen window, wiping her hands on a towel after washing up. The girls were in the back room, their laughter tumbling like wind chimes down the hall. Callum was in the barn, oiling hinges and checking tack. Then she saw it. A flicker, too bright for twilight. Her stomach dropped. She opened the door and stepped onto the porch. Smoke. Not from the chimney, not from the stove, from the barn. The structure, old but sturdy, was already breathing flame through its eastern wall. The fire licked upward, ravenous. Heat shimmered off the dry wood, and from the edge of the forest, 3 figures emerged, half men, half specters. Victor Slade had come. He didn't need to announce himself. Eliza knew that crooked posture, that arrogant gait. But it was the man to his left, Ezra, mean-eyed and always too eager, who moved first. In a blur, he broke from the trees and ran straight for the house. Eliza screamed, but not for herself, for Pearl. The youngest girl had wandered out onto the porch, barefoot, holding a drawing she'd made for Callum. Ezra grabbed her by the arm and yanked her like she was nothing more than a sack of grain. "Let her go!" Eliza shouted, her voice raw and full for the first time. No longer a whisper, no longer afraid. Ezra sneered, "She's the price of your pride, girl. He wants you back, and now I got something he'll trade for." From behind the barn, Callum appeared. He didn't yell, he didn't warn. He raised the rifle. Ezra spun toward the sound. Too late. The shot rang out, crisp and final. Ezra dropped to the ground, clutching his shoulder with a scream that tore through the flames. Pearl broke free, stumbling back toward the house. Eliza caught her halfway, scooping her into her arms and running through the door as smoke curled after them. Victor stood at the edge of the trees, face twisted with rage. He lifted his gun, but didn't fire, because another voice rang out, "Drop it!" Sheriff Dalton had arrived, rifle drawn, eyes cold. Behind him rode 2 deputies, guns ready. The standoff was short. Victor growled, "You picked the wrong side." The sheriff didn't blink. "Seems to be the right one tonight." He stepped forward and cuffed Victor without ceremony. The outlaw didn't struggle, but his eyes never left Eliza. "I'll come back for you," he hissed. Callum moved to the porch steps. "No, you won't." Victor was dragged away, spitting promises and threats that sounded hollow against the wind. Inside the house, the girls clung to one another. Eliza sat on the edge of the bed. Pearl nestled against her, still shaking. Callum entered, rifle slung over his shoulder, clothes streaked with ash. He looked at them all, at the fear, the trembling, the silence. Then his eyes met Eliza's. She stood slowly. Her lip was bleeding where she'd bitten it. Her dress was torn at the hem, but she was still standing. Callum stepped forward, unsure for once. But then Pearl reached out and wrapped her arms around Eliza's neck. Just like that, the line vanished. She was no longer the stranger, the outsider, the woman in the cage. She was theirs. Later that night, the barn smoldered, reduced to a black skeleton of beams. The sheriff stayed until the flames were fully out. The girls slept together in a heap of quilts in the front room. Eliza curled among them, her body aching from adrenaline. but her heart oddly full. She lay awake long after the others had drifted off, eyes on the ceiling, one hand resting on Pearl's back. The little girl breathed deeply, softly, unaware of just how close the world had come to changing. Callum sat by the window, rifle across his lap, watching the dark outside like it might move again. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The house had been tested, and it had held. Eliza thought of the cage, of the cold metal, of the people who walked past her without a glance. And then she looked down at the 5 girls bundled around her like roots around a seed. This was no longer borrowed peace. It was chosen, fought for, earned. She was no longer just surviving. She was part of something now. Family. The days that followed the fire unfolded with a gentle rhythm. Slower, softer, but more certain. The kind of rhythm born not from survival, but from something steadier. Belonging. The barn was gone, but its skeleton remained. Charred beams black against the morning sky. Still, the land endured. And so did they. One morning, Eliza walked with Pearl, the littlest of Callum's daughters, baskets swinging between them as they gathered eggs behind the house. Dew still clung to the grass, and the sun crept low across the valley, painting everything in soft gold. Pearl, bright-eyed and humming, darted between the hens. Eliza followed, slower, more thoughtful. She paused as they passed the barn's remains. There, carved into the last standing beam, were 6 names, each etched carefully in a clean, steady hand. 5 she recognized: June, Lila, Ruth, Beth, Pearl, and now, a 6th, Eliza. The letters weren't large. They weren't even new. The edges were smoothed by wind and time. He'd carved it days ago, maybe more. He hadn't told her. He didn't need to. Eliza stood in the quiet, hand resting gently against the letters. It wasn't a claim. It wasn't possession. It was acknowledgement, recognition, a place. She turned the old grain shack at the edge of the property into something more than storage. With a few nails, scrap wood, and shelves Callum helped her build, it became a sewing room, sunlit, clean, full of breath. She started small, repairing Ruth's doll dress, patching Lila's favorite apron. But then word spread. Women began arriving from down the road, from over the ridge, even from 2 counties away. Some brought fabric. Some brought nothing but stories and tired hands. They came to stitch, but they stayed to heal. Eliza taught what her mother had once shown her: how to mend a seam, how to breathe through pain, how not to pull too tight because every thread, like every wound, needs room to move. Needle by needle, something in her stitched itself whole again. She wasn't leading. She wasn't hiding. She was simply living. One evening, just as the sun dipped behind the ridge and the house filled with the smell of baking bread and lamp oil, Callum stepped onto the porch with something wrapped in cloth. He said nothing as he approached. Eliza looked up from where she sat, sewing basket at her feet. Beth nestled beside her with a book. Callum knelt, unwrapped the bundle, and held out a small silver ring. It wasn't ornate, no jewel, no flourish, just a simple, honest band. Quiet as the man who offered it. He didn't get down on one knee. He didn't make a speech. He just looked at her and asked, "Will you stay? Not marry me, not be mine, just stay." Eliza didn't answer right away. She studied his face, the weathered lines, the patience in his eyes, the scar near his temple. She thought of the girls, the sewing room, the way the house never asked her to explain. Then she nodded, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because, for the first time in her life, this felt like home. And when he slipped the ring onto her hand, it wasn't just a promise. It was a quiet vow that from now on, no matter what shadows crept from the woods, she would never face them alone. Eliza Bray's story may be set in 1887, but its lessons are timeless. How many people today still carry invisible cages, poverty, loneliness, trauma, or simply feeling forgotten in a world that moves too fast to care? How many still long not for rescue, but for recognition, to be seen, to be trusted, and to find a place where they truly belong? Willow Bend Ranch was never about land or blood ties. It was about choice. A widowed father who chose compassion over silence. 5 girls who chose welcome over suspicion. And a woman who chose, finally, to stay, not because someone saved her, but because someone believed she was worth saving. In today's America, maybe we could use more of that kind of quiet courage. Less noise, more kindness, fewer judgments. More spaces where people can stitch themselves whole again. What do you think? Have you ever known someone who just needed a second chance? Or maybe you've lived it yourself. We'd love to hear your reflections in the comments below. Your stories, your lessons, your thoughts. Let's keep this porch light burning for those still trying to find their way home. And if this story moved you, if you believe, like we do, that love, faith, and dignity never go out of style, please consider subscribing to The West That Never Left. Click like, share this with someone who needs it, and help us keep telling stories that remind us all. Even in the harshest lands, the heart can still bloom. And the West, well, it never really left. Thank you for listening.